My mum was like, you need to stop talking about poo at Christmas dinner. The idea that anyone wants to keep a helpful treatment from you is a big red flag.
When people are looking for answers for a medical problem that they haven't been able to find from their GP or the specialist they've been to or the second or third specialist they've been to, sometimes we describe, oh, they went down a rabbit hole.
Yep.
You called it a wormhole. And as a science fiction nerd, I'm very grateful that you did.
You do want, if someone's putting an IV in your arm, you want to know that that person has some credentials to be inside you. It makes it even more difficult for those doctors to do so when waiting in the wings, there's someone saying, actually, I can cure you.
Thank you for writing this book, as difficult as it must have been, but it's a very important book. It's something close to my heart. I am the son of two doctors, and you walked in, Wolfgang's home sick from school, but he's watching this show upstairs. It's called Operation Ouch. There's his twin doctors, and they're in a hospital, and they kind of demystify a lot of things about medicine, and they make it, I think it's a really powerful piece of medical communication, because there's kids and they're like, this is what's wrong with them, and now they're better, and they show fully everything. They show the surgery, they show everything. They say gross alert, and so we cover our eyes sometimes. But it's the kind of stuff I was exposed to as a kid, and it was very normalized to me to be around hospitals, to be around medicine, to be around people who went, well, this is the treatment as we understand it. And then one of them would go to a conference and come back going, there's this new treatment. It's amazing. So what we did yesterday, we don't do leeches anymore. Now we do antibiotics. But that was the best thing we had until then. And then enough research and stuff and trials played out, and we went, you know what, this is probably better than that. So let's do this now. And then just knowing that and the scientific thinking that my parents had, I was very normalized to that. And it did give me almost somewhat of an inoculation, and I use that word deliberately, an inoculation to some of the malarkey that has been happening since, well, for a while before COVID. I want to say early 2000s, when a lot kind of the newer vaccination stuff came out. But in recent times, there's been such a terrifying amount of shit going on, like home births, natural births, all the kind of radicalization that's going on there. And I'm sorry I had to take the death of your cousin to go and write this, but obviously that was a really important thing that you saw. It happened so close to you, you had a witness to it.
Yep.
At what point did you think, okay, this is how it's important for me to write this, or this is how I'm going to process this, or was there a combination of the two?
It was definitely a combination of the two. And I think, so when Lauren died, it was very disorienting, right? Because we didn't even know that she was in Malaysia. So, we had to find that out. And then things happened very quickly where we were trying to work things out, because she, like a lot of people in similar situations, kept a lot to herself. She had managed to compartmentalize her life into kind of the people that get it and the people that don't. And her, most of us were the people that don't. And I think in her defense, that was pretty fair. And so when that happened, I immediately saw this is algorithms doing this, or, I sort of tried to place her in the culture. What's going on here? How did she get here? And then I just found that I was painting a bit of a picture and kind of connecting things, a bit like a patchwork of the internet culture that I was seeing. And it was not that relevant to what my family was going through at the time, which was very kind of immediate actions, that needed to be taken in terms of funeral arrangements and those types of things. But I just found that I didn't get over it. I was sort of getting, the word triggered is used a lot, but I was sort of seeing things in the media and just feeling this, like, I don't know, arousal in my nervous system where I thought, no, like, that's somehow connected, or that feels like something Lauren has said. And so that's when I started, just for no real reason that I understood, collecting information and tabs and sort of keeping these tabs open on my computer. And then it was really later that I turned it into a book, but it started with like a very genuine need to find out what had happened to her.
Right. You're not approaching this as a civilian. You have, a career in this space. You have training. How was that useful to you?
think I am a good researcher, and I'm really happy about that. Having written, a nonfiction book before on queer history, and the need to write such a book through interviewing people and finding disparate pieces of information that weren't stitched together, I built up this skill in researching. And it was really only when I eventually employed the help of a private detective did I realize how good I was.
But I guess the other thing that is useful is that as someone who's worked in this space, the basic training that you get when you start journalism is that you've got to have some distance between you and it. There has to be an objectivity about it. You have to recognize your own biases.
Yeah.
And I know it would have been very difficult because you're looking for the most obvious answer. You're looking in those times of grief, you're looking for someone to blame, you're looking for someone to point a finger at. Did you find it that you were able to kind of look a little wider and question your initial kind of thoughts and go, well, hang on, I might be just emotional here about this particular thing, which is this person I loved and grew up with. What else might have been going on? It might not just be, I don't get it. What else has happened to make her have made this choice, this person I've known so well?
I think absolutely, because when you find out someone that you care about or have a relationship with is in, what I've called the wormhole, your first response is often exasperation, frustration, kind of surprise. And so I didn't agree with a lot of what Lauren pursued for her health, but also, where she was finding her information and things like that. But at the same time, I knew that because the action she'd taken was so drastic, she had a very real motivation or reason to take such action. I knew that there had to be truth and something valid underneath what a lot of people thought was crazy behavior. And so I used her as my guide in a way so that I could kind of get in her head and think, well, how were you feeling at this point in time? How were you responding? What were you responding to make you take such action? And I think really, as I did that, I found so many people that were in her situation at different points, and the empathy of kind of using her as my yardstick, which I do almost literally in my head, kind of talking to her, being like, would you agree with this? Would you not agree with this? And would I agree with you on this? That process allowed me to have a point of view, but also make sure that was tempered with empathy for other people in the situation.
When did you start to notice, and it happens when we're growing up with our cousins, if you're close to your cousins, you all kind of oscillate around the same thing. For me, it was, we're all immigrants. I mean, my other cousins weren't, but my brother and I were, but there's different languages being spoken at home. We eat different food. And then as we kind of grow up and we start to kind of morph a little bit more into the community, the things that keep us common and kind of get less and less. And they lived in a different state, but these people, right? And you spend time with cousins and it's really lovely. At what point did you start to notice that things might have been a little, going in an interesting direction for your cousin?
Well, it would have been before COVID, which I think is important because COVID was a period of time where a lot of these conversations about alternative medicine and, health misinformation, disinformation became more well known. So I think, and I do talk about this in the book, there was a specific time where it was Christmas Day and I was with my cousin, Lauren, and we had just sort of arrived at Christmas lunch at my auntie's house. And
how old were you both at this time?
I was about 26.
Yes.
Or 2017, sorry. I was 27 and Lauren was maybe 33.
Okay.
And so she...
What a cool relationship. Like, so you guys would have been like in your late teens and early 20s, like tight, going out, hanging out. Not
really, because what's interesting about Lauren is that she was, throughout the 90s, right, she was 5 years older than me and was the ultimate, 90s cool girl, Hanson posters all over her walls. And
she and I can share that in common.
Yeah.
They're my second favorite band.
Yeah, and I can see why. They wrote all their own songs.
They're amazing.
Incredible stuff.
Yeah.
And I think growing up, I looked up to her. I didn't have an older sister. So, when I was given permission to call her on the family landline to tell her about Hanson, that was really... formative for me. So I looked up to her, but she did live down Mornington Peninsula. So we saw each other around the orbit of a family. But I'd always thought, God, she's cool. Among all the metrics that I guess a younger family member would think. She's so pretty. She's got such shiny hair. Her hair's so dark and straight compared to mine. You know, she taught me to apply makeup, that kind of thing. But at this Christmas lunch, we were talking, and it was a time when she had started this fermented diet where she was only eating this white grey blob stuff, which was kind of like kefir, which she was making out of different things. It was all fermented and it was in these white containers. My auntie was very annoyed because she couldn't fit the ham in the fridge because of all of Lauren's fermented food containers.
Why was she doing that?
Well, at that time it was gut health. I don't know. Do you remember the gut health craze?
Do I ever?
When it came out? This was really important because I'm an IBS girly, right?
Irritable bowel syndrome.
Irritable bowel syndrome.
Which for those playing along at home who've never had it, it's not just I've got a fart, is it?
Oh, no. It could be anything at any time in any day.
And it's brought on by food?
Food, but for me, stress and anxiety, mental health, all of those types of things. And I found it really difficult to manage. You know, I was very unwell, and it's not very cute. It's not very sexy to be in your, early 20s.
No, give me fibroids any day.
Yeah, I'm
happy to talk about blood, but poo, no.
Yeah. You don't want to be managing this thing where you're like, I'm sorry, I might need to shit myself.
Yeah.
And no one was talking about it. And so when this came up, I was ravenous for any information about the gut, right? And so there was kombucha everywhere. So it was totally normal for me that Lauren, being someone who I considered on the pulse, was eating fermented food only. And I really wanted to defend her to my auntie. I was like, oh, Auntie Susan, chill out. Like, everybody is eating probiotics at the moment.
Yeah.
And so I tried to sort of, validate Lauren, and was like, some people are doing coffee enemas. And it was my auntie's reaction to just be like, well, Lauren loves a coffee enema. And then I realized that I wanted to know more. And that started like a joking relationship with Lauren. But I'd recently heard about poo transplants.
Amazing things. If you need them, and they are doing, if you need them, they're incredible.
They're
like peptides. If you need them, they're incredible. If you don't need them, could be a bad time.
And pretty weird to hear about. So, yeah, obviously the idea of a poo transplant is you take the poo of someone with a healthy microbiome and you insert that into the bowels, the colon, intestine of somebody who doesn't have a healthy microbiome. And so given this, I thought, well, it's not that weird to put coffee up your bum. So I started talking to her about this, and she told me a lot of things like, you really need to get, your gut microbiome tested. They don't do it at, your regular GP.
It's not the envelope you get from the government every 2 years. You got to go to the GP that go, oh, other GPs don't like me. You got to go to that one.
That's exactly it.
I've been to a few of them.
Yeah, that's exactly it. So she sent me her recommendation to these GPs. Of course, you can't claim this back on Medicare, but, they'll send it overseas. And at this point, I was really, yes, okay, how much is this going to cost? I'm going to try and make this happen. I want to fix my IBS. But then later that lunch, after we did the Christmas crackers and my mum was like, you need to stop talking about poo at Christmas dinner. I heard Lauren talking about, how Bill Gates has caused a lot of autism. And so while I was aware that that was a bit of a conspiracy theory, it wasn't a time like it has been post-COVID where we were so divided. At the time, I thought anti-vaccination beliefs were a bit kooky.
Yeah.
Versus anything with real
still kooky, impact. Not yet cookie. Cooker stuff came later, but
this is
kooker.
Yeah, this is kooky.
In the kook era, not the cook era.
It's cute.
Kind of.
At that time, I was like, oh, haha, yes. That's very funny. And it became clear to me that Lauren didn't think it was funny and was actually trying to say that this is a real problem we need to deal with. And at that point, my dad, his biggest, pragmatic, stoic man you've met, he was like, I can't entertain this conversation. We're not going to get anywhere, and the conversation moves on.
Was it your dad that made the joke about the coffee enema and that, well, she doesn't mind a long black? Was it your dad that made that joke?
Yeah.
Great line.
Yeah.
Like that's a Christmas lunch line. If you're talking about your niece's coffee enemas, to then come out with, yeah, well, I guess you'd like a long black. Like, that's some solid dad gear. I read that. I'm like, good dad work there.
That's
That's
him.
good shit.
Yeah, I think he rises to the occasion.
Yeah, that's really good.
But I think later when he was saying I can't support this conversation, Lauren, he sort of made a cross finger with his hands and went, "No, anti-vaxxer," and we all laughed.
Now here we are.
And at that point,
and you get a slow motion version of the rebound effect in full force.
Yeah, and Lauren kind of doubled down, and that's when we said, okay, it's clear that you're not joking. Yeah. Let's move on with lunch.
When did you know that, when did you first find out that, you couldn't find where she was and that she wasn't even in the country?
Well, what had happened was a man that she had been living with, and nobody had known that she was living with him. We thought she was actually living in country Victoria, but she was living down the peninsula with this man. And he had contacted my other cousin, so Lauren's sister, over Facebook. So there's this other inbox that for people that you don't know, right? And so it's really a miracle that my cousin actually received this message, but essentially it said hi, and this is from a no profile picture.
Yeah.
So completely relatively anonymous account. Hi, your sister is having a medical procedure and it's not gone well. There are complications. She's in hospital in Malaysia. And from that point of view, he was saying, how do I get in contact with your mum? And so from that point of view, my cousin told my auntie. And at that point, we had no idea where she'd been living, but that was the first time we knew that she had been in Malaysia. My auntie would typically speak to Lauren every day, or very, very regularly. And so she hadn't heard from her for a couple of days, but not long enough for that to raise significant alarm bells.
What led her to, how did she even end up in Malaysia? What was the thing that she was looking to solve?
So she had a very complex history of, I'd say, chronic illnesses where she didn't really know what they were. It started, so my earliest memory was that Lauren had chronic fatigue syndrome. And, that always aligned with my memories of her. She was very sleepy, would get up at 11. But even as a child, when I would be kind of up and bouncing at 6, she really struggled with fatigue, completed her year 12 over, 2 years. And then when she was in her 20s, she'd go to uni. When she was in her 20s, she got a diagnosis of fibromyalgia.
It's quite painful.
Yeah, I mean, and I remember hearing about it. I think they were exploring it when from about 16 years old, because she, would get these really stiff shoulder muscles that would crack. And when I heard about it through my dad, it wasn't something we knew about. Dad was like, "Oh, Lauren's been diagnosed with this thing called fibromyalgia." I said, "What is it?" He said, it's a disease where your whole body is sending pain signals to your brain for no reason. So
really tough.
Really,
really, really tough stuff.
Awful condition. I couldn't think of anything worse.
Really hard. And understandable that you would be wanting to look for a solution that doesn't involve heavy painkillers or risky surgery, even like surgery. I made a whole documentary about chronic and persistent pain, and we covered a surgery where someone got a nerve implant into their spinal column, like super risky. Yeah, coin flip at best, but it worked for this person. But that was this is it. And when people are in that kind of chronic pain, and I don't know if this is true for Lauren, but it's not quite a job that painkillers can do. They end up on things like antipsychotics and things like this to slow the thoughts down.
Yeah.
Because that's the best kind of thing you can do rather than just turn them into complete zombies. But it's no fun. The drugs you need to be on just to have a life. It's really hard. So it's understandable in that desperation, and I can relate to that. I mean, I wanted a doctor to chop my leg off. I wanted to have a nerve block on my right leg. I was in so much pain. I get that desperation. And I understand that when you're in that space of desperation, the doctors have gone, we've actually done everything that we can do. You know, that's hard.
Yeah.
It's really hard.
On your physical self, but also your mental health, because how are we supposed to cope mentally when we're told, you know, the road ends here, you know, the system that you've grown up, like, you know, you have with physicians as parents that you've always grown up trusting that will catch you when you get to that point that go, you know, it's almost kind of like you're on the train and the bridge is, you know, not built yet.
I got really lucky. My dad was a rheumatologist, so very complicated stuff, autoimmune, no cure.
Yep.
Real heavy quality of life stuff, like can't hold a spoon kind of thing, and you're 15.
Yeah.
This is your luck. And I would ask him, it's like, how do you break news to people like that? He would say, well, I tell him these things happen, they're nobody's fault. The sooner you accept that it's happening, the sooner you can start figuring out how to live the rest of your life with this thing. Not everybody has that kind of perspective, but I understand the desperation. I understand wanting to, I'll do fucking anything.
Yeah. Yeah.
Make it stop.
Yeah, I think that's the thing. And when there's not conversation around it. So when Lauren was diagnosed, we're in the early 2000s at this point.
Yeah,
so there was not much of a conversation around chronic pain. And I think what becomes dangerous is it's right for doctors, for physicians to have to break really awful news to people. That is the kindest way to do it. It makes it even more difficult for those doctors to do so when waiting in the wings, there's someone saying, actually, I can cure you. And, you know, I reckon you've got this thing. And then all of a sudden they say everything that medical ethics would stop, you know, another doctor saying, which is essentially what happened to Lauren is people stepped in and all of a sudden it's very weak to tell someone in such agony, you know, let's spend some time, you know, doing some pain reprocessing therapy or whatever it might be. If there's someone else that says, or you just simply take this and I will make you feel better.
It's a groundbreaking treatment. But honestly, Big Pharma don't want you to know about it.
Exactly.
And here's beautiful photos of people getting up and walking. And just Western Union, 20 grand to me, and you're on your
good.
And like generally, if you have to go to another country to receive a treatment for a thing, you're going to want to look pretty freaking hard at what that is before you bet the farm on it.
Yep.
Now, I know there are some things that aren't available in Australia, some pretty advanced, very sciencey stuff but if it's anywhere in the kind of Southeast Asian or Eastern European region and involves a chicken sacrifice or something at the start, you may want to really
want to pause. That. Absolutely. Yeah. You do want to pause.
But it's so hard to do when all you want to do is for this thing to stop because you can't sleep and you can't face another day of the rest of your life feeling like this.
Yeah.
So I also get it.
I think part of what makes it also so seductive to take that route, it's the connection between the person, because at this point, if you're in chronic pain, you're not living the life that is going to be full of connections and community and all those things we know as humans we need. You can barely connect with
the person in front of you. There's so much noise inside you.
You're so isolated. So it's that, and then you're so starved for even just a connection with a person, with someone who listens to you or feels like, or it feels like is validating you, that you will absolutely trust them. And then from that point, it's very, very difficult to kind of intervene if someone's, you know, up down that path.
By the time you found out where she was, though, it was quite too late, wasn't it?
Absolutely, it was too late, yeah.
What happened? She was diagnosed with, some guy said, oh, no, you haven't got this. You've got this.
Yeah, so she was eventually diagnosed with chronic Lyme disease. So
in Australia?
In Australia. So chronic Lyme disease is a diagnosis that is disputed. So the Australian medical authorities don't recognise Lyme disease as endemic to Australia at all.
Yeah.
And then on top of that, even in the United States where there is Lyme disease, chronic Lyme disease is not recognize they have other language to talk about.
It's a tick-borne pathogen with ticks that don't live here.
Yeah, absolutely.
I'm not trying to gaslight or deny anybody, but I'm just like, the fact is that ticks that carry it don't live here.
Yeah. And, that's not to say that there aren't other ticks that make people very, very sick here.
Of course.
Ticks, bad news. But she fell into a community that I really identifies with having chronic Lyme disease. And that becomes a bit of a red flag as soon as you engage with doctors or infectious disease specialists, through the, Medicare system. If you say I've got chronic Lyme disease, they have a tendency to be like, oh, one of those. Now, there are physicians in Australia that call themselves Lyme literate MDs, which is another dog whistle or a flag to say, I believe in chronic Lyme.
And for a small monthly fee, you can be a part of my WhatsApp group of people who are just like you.
Yeah, and I would say it's a large monthly fee. And at that point, there's a lot of online groups that operate on Facebook, and that's how they kind of build the network, I guess, of
It's not
doctors.
just for cheese made out of breast milk. Like, there's some wild shit that can happen in these places.
I mean, I think the first thing they would do is just really, really intense long courses of intravenous antibiotics. And that's when it gets topsy-turvy, because remember, Lauren was somebody who was so focused on healing her gut, she was eating only kefir. To then turn around and have intravenous antibiotics, every single week is quite difficult. Well, it was quite difficult for me to get my head around. And so they will absolutely beckon you into their warm embrace and convince you of things like, if this particular doctor has been outcast by AHPRA, the regulators, that's good. That means they care for patients.
Oh, man. And this is the weird mind games that we play and the parallels. And you draw it in the book. You draw the parallels between all the way to politics, to right-wing conspiratorial kind of political thinking, to, I don't know, the capital gains tax discounts, to, whatever. There's this really strange polarization that can happen. And when it comes to income tax, it's not super dangerous. Like, yes, it's complicated and people are going to fight at Christmas lunch over it, but it's not, people aren't going to die. When it comes to health stuff, especially kids and people who are vulnerable, like your late cousin, it's really, really dangerous. Yes, I can get the feeling that I'm being validated and these people get me. And after years of being told no, and as you write in the book, if I presented as a white dude from Brisbane to the same doctor that your cousin, I would have been treated very differently and my pain would have been taken in a very different level of seriousness to hers. It's unfortunate. It is, as you say, it's a symptom of the system. It is an issue and people are working very, very hard on it. But
writing it, yes.
Absolutely does happen. It has happened and people are working hard to change that. But when people are in that state and they want just someone see, feel, understand what this feels like, and they get in those communities, it's intoxicating. And so decisions that they previously wouldn't have made start to become easier, and it's a slippery slope.
It is. It's a very slippery slope. I think that's how I found so many parallels with cult dynamics because of the surveillance of others in these groups, self-surveillance. And I think when you add children into the mix, because sadly what I've seen in these groups that make me want to scream and throw my laptop out the window and all sorts of things is out of care. And this is where, the empathy comes in. Parents will do almost anything to help a sick child. But, I've seen recommendations of, how to feed your child bleach, how to sting your child with bees, how to put ivermectin, on your child's facial rash, and not just regular ivermectin from overseas, the stuff from the horse supply store. And so to think like, this is the solutions that I'm seeing that you would typically drench on a cow, who has a lot of exposure to parasites being on a farm, not what you should put on your child's face. And so those things that you see, you start to think like, we got to look at this. Yeah. Who's looking at this?
Yeah.
And I really, don't think enough people are.
What are some signs do you think that people should look out for that they might be slipping a bit away from, I guess the reality of what it is to have actually medical treatment for something?
I think blanket statements about institutions' intentions, as soon as you start thinking like all medicine does this, medicine exists to keep you sick so they can sell you a cure, medicine is not for people like me. There's a truth in all of it, absolutely. Like throughout history, the medical institution has wronged people and is, I guess, built on the same structural inequalities that society is. But when you start hearing people, say big pharma wants to keep you sick and that kind of thing, or doctors want to keep you sick and paying, I think that's a sign, because when you internalize that belief, it's very, very alienating, because I think something I found out while writing this was that trust is very restorative. As soon as you start thinking, oh, actually, maybe they're not who they say they are, or maybe they don't think what I want them to, that makes you very anxious and very alert. And so that would be a first sign. You become more vulnerable as soon as you start thinking things like that. It's of course not to say that there isn't truth there. I'm always saying, you should get as many opinions as you need.
Yeah.
However, when you start hearing that, I think where you're getting your medical information from is really important. So there are, if people are saying, I've been told this by my doctor, but, and, sorry, Osher, but on a podcast, I heard this.
Yeah. No, that's fine.
That's when you sort of start thinking, okay, well, what are you looking for?
Yeah.
And that's when I think the most important thing is to stay connected to that person and sit with them and see where they're getting that information.
Are you avoiding the discomfort of the acceptance that something isn't the way you thought it was going to be? Whatever that is. And it could be fertility. It could be, in my case, it was the osteoarthritis in my leg that was keeping me awake.
Yep.
Like I didn't want to get the surgery. And eventually the pillow forts got too large and I was just necking so much Panadol and stuff. My stomach was rotting more off. Just fucking get the surgery.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
I didn't want I didn't want to be an acceptance. I couldn't run anymore. Like I just kept running and it kept hurting. So I kept running, but it kept hurting.
Yeah.
It was so clear what I had to do that I didn't want to be an acceptance of it. I get that. But if you're avoiding that acceptance, as hard as it is, that might also be perhaps a sign. If you find yourself, I don't know, late at night and you find a great revelation and comfort in a website that is hand-coded in HTML1, that may be a sign.
Yep.
That it might not be.
Yeah, I think the idea that anyone wants to keep a helpful treatment from you is a big red flag. I think we do have to acknowledge that most doctors get into medicine because they are interested in health and want to help people. There are really dodgy doctors, as we've seen, in the recent kind of surgeon who was doing endometriosis surgeries on women that didn't need them. There are also really wonderful alternative medical practitioners, but there are also really dodgy ones. And so I think it's really important to have a critical eye on where you're looking for your information. But I think we need to accept that the human body's baseline kind of state is not perfect health.
Yeah.
And so I think this idea that we've been fed, which I talk about as restitution narratives, which I took from Arthur W. Frank, who wrote a book on it, but this idea that if we are sick, well, then the outcome of that is better. If you kept running, then with enough time or strengthening or whatever, then your leg would return to its totally optimal state. And I think that's the case with a lot of illnesses, but with chronic illnesses, it's not. And so I think there's got to be an acceptance of we can't expect to always get 100% better. Living with something is a really important kind of way to approach a lot of conditions.
And it can be, in my experience, it might not be what you originally thought.
No.
It can actually be better than what you are experiencing. I take meds every day at the moment, And yeah, I go off at the airport with the old scanners, but new scanners less. But this is what I've got one leg longer than the other, but this is what I live with now. And it's okay. I still live a life full of the things I value, and I still get to enjoy the things that make it just looks a little different. And that's okay. We often find when people are looking for answers for a medical problem that they haven't been able to find from their GP or the specialist they've been to or the second or third specialist they've been to, sometimes we describe, they went down a rabbit hole.
Yep.
You called it a wormhole. And as a science fiction nerd, I'm very grateful that you did. But I'd like to ask, why did you use the word wormhole and not rabbit hole? Because rabbit holing is a thing that people they call on YouTube, people end up rabbit holing because the way the algorithm just keeps feeding them the same shit. Why did you use wormhole and not rabbit hole?
It's an interesting question. I think there's two parts to the answer. The first is I think you get sucked into a wormhole. So a rabbit hole, you're kind of burrowing away, you're making your own path, doing this, having a nice time and just not being very aware of where you're ending up. That's part of the way we passively consume the internet. But a wormhole, you are being pulled down with a lot of content that is designed to destabilize your trust in the existing fabric of your life, of the society that you live in, and then also cause you to fear those people and institutions that you were taught could help you. And then at the same time, cause you to be on edge, to be angry. And then when you get down to the depths, you start to question, every belief you've ever had. And that is when kind of the tenets of your reality can kind of crumble. And I also think there's another thing, which is just the parasites, the parasite craze that we're in at the moment. This idea that, we have RFK Jr. who literally had a worm in his brain. But what I'm seeing is kind of the new gut health. It's sort of the root cause that everybody is kind of pinning all sorts of symptoms and illnesses on this idea that we have worms inside us.
The thing about wormholes is that wormholes are theoretical place where the folding of space-time comes together and you traverse a colossal distances of light years and suddenly end up in a different part of space and time through this hole in the fabric of space-time. And I'm just wondering if you could kind of complete that narrative. So, because it really does mimic the first couple of hours, days, weeks of cult indoctrination of, everything you know is wrong. And now you're in this terrifying place. What do you know? Here's safety. Right here in this compound. It is so wild how manipulable, how malleable we are as humans that the same patterns happen. So the thing with the wormhole, when it comes to medical stuff, what's the alternate thing that you get spat out and suddenly you're on the other side of this thing? What are you looking at that could kind of solidify that?
I mean, I think that's how you end up interested in alt-right politics and conspiracy theories, which is very strange to think that's where you might end up. But I think when I was looking at it and I was really charting what happens, and what happens is, you start disillusioned because in this case of chronic pain and maybe dismissal by the medical system. And so you start looking for alternatives. And at this point, you're being a critical thinker. You are looking at your options, everything that, in particular women should do. But we start to see things, okay, we might start to encounter something where somebody tells us, actually, you should try this, and it's not really part of medicine. And that could be something that is genuinely helpful. For example, there are a lot of herbs and, naturopaths that have helped people for all manner of conditions. There are, you cannot put a double-blind trial to understand the efficacy of Chinese medicine, for example. However, that might be helpful, but then you might stray, right, into something where somebody is going to offer you even more validation, They're going to catch you and then say, you're right, I understand you, just keep paying. And at this point, I think you might get a little bit of that sunk cost fallacy. I'm already in this far, let's try it. And you might move away from your friends and family at this point and start to find people that share your beliefs. And they will reinforce that narrative of nobody understands you, but we do. At this point, I think I call it like a fork. And I think there are people where I would definitely consider myself one of them, where we observe systems and, issues with those systems, things that are unfair and biased. And what we can do is we can turn outwards and change that system. We're seeing a lot of people do wonderful work to kind of combat medical misogyny at the moment. And so they're looking at those systems. But then there is another way where people can be convinced that they need to heal themselves. And I think it's that, do we turn outward and look at collectively, hey, we have a problem here, we have a lot of people in our community in pain? Or do we turn inwards and go, all right, well, I'm on my own, medicine can't help me, I'm just going to have to heal myself, which is noble on the surface. But then you start thinking, all right, well, now I've got a very individualized view of the world, I'm out for me. And then you might start thinking of things like, well, I can't trust anyone. So I don't trust these, like, if you cannot trust that the planet is the shape that we know it is, that's very difficult to kind of come back from. Same with Holocaust denialism. It is one of the most documented atrocities of modern history, right? So if you're not believing audiovisual evidence, kind of lived experience and testimonies, photos, all of those types of things, becomes very, very difficult to get any kind of shared truth that you and I agree on.
It's so frightening because I can understand, as you mentioned, the medical misogyny thing when we did and it's not deliberate. They didn't say, let's make a system that is terrible for women. It's not what they set out to do. It just kind of happened because, it just happened. When we made that pain documentary, I was very grateful we were able to cover this particular woman who had the nerve implant. We were able to talk a lot about endometriosis. And when we did, we were putting stuff on television that no one really had any idea because it's such an unknown thing. People don't know what causes it. Yep. And it's just devastating in our community. And, speaking with a couple of people who I think one ended up in the final cut, just the sitting across from a doctor and being told, look, the scans will say nothing's there.
Yeah.
Okay. Because they're in between, some kind of flare up or something or other. And yet they're just desperate.
Yeah.
Desperate. I understand. So yes, this is a problem with the system. And it doesn't represent the entire thing. And it's so hard because you've got this personal experience of being denied care, help, empathy, understanding in this moment. But it's so personal. It's so hard to feel that and not take it personally and not think, well, the whole system is this, because that's your experience.
And I think as well, and this was interesting when I was talking to one of the hosts of the Conspirituality podcast who's written a lot about, alternative medicine and cult dynamics. And we were talking about how countries with socialized healthcare, so the Medicare system or the NHS, because we have had no reason to be overtly critical, like in the US, where people understand that the healthcare system is just tragic.
It's terrible.
It does not function. And that's something that everybody knows. We watch The Pit and we just see how, cooked that system is. But here we have this narrative where we've grown up, and unless you have any particular illness or chronic condition that is not supported by Medicare, in which case you are alienated, we've grown up that, you pay your taxes and you get better because we've got Medicare, and how good is that? And I grew up thinking, yes, thank God we have Medicare.
I agree. But it's incredible.
It's an amazing system for 99% of people. And so when you don't like something in the US, if you've been wronged by the medical system, you tell your neighbor, all of a sudden you're on the same page. In Australia, it could be a very lonely experience to feel alienated by our healthcare system.
It's hard to get your head around that government systems built on government budgets, which are never enough, no matter who's in power, are designed to help the most amount of people they can in a practical way.
Yep, in the least amount of time.
Not everybody. But if you were to build a system that everyone had the equal outcomes, you wouldn't have money for anything.
No.
And it sucks. That sucks, but that is what we have.
Yeah.
And it's really, 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 really hard, and unfortunately puts people in such a space of vulnerability. I don't know, man. The cult thing is so weird. And just the patterns that you identify in the book, the patterns that are so similar between cults, between this medical thing, between, as I mentioned earlier, the natural birth movement or when you get into the real fringes of politics, everything you've been told is a lie. Nothing is real.
Yep.
We're real.
Yep.
If you listen to anyone else, you're out.
You're not loyal.
You're not a part.
You're not loyal to this guy who is so brave.
So brave.
And he's even so brave he's in prison.
Those people were just out to make money off you.
Yep.
We are here to protect you.
Which is why we need you to pay.
It's so dangerous. And to think that we actually have to give up a little bit of, it's hard. We have to defer authority to someone who's educated. But you and I are sitting in a house. This house was built 120 years ago, okay? It's not falling on us because 115 years ago, the people who built this house went to some sort of college and learned how to build beams and struts. And so however many tons of sandstone sit above us don't fall on us. I want the people that build my houses to have studied.
Yeah, you do want, if someone's putting an IV in your arm, you want to know that that person has some credentials to be inside you.
And yes, as a general rule, if someone's going to be inside you, credentials, please.
Yes, diploma, then entry.
The very least consent.
I'll say, and that's that.
And that's the end of the podcast. But there can be a discomfort when giving over our authority.
Yep.
And deferring our authority to authorities. Like, I don't know the answers. I'm going to have to ask someone because it sucks not knowing. But we've also, as you mentioned, there was this expectation that, well, I'm restorative. I will grow and heal until the day I'm dead.
Yep.
Like, no, 30th birthday, and then you kind of wake up, and that's the best you're going to feel all day. And by the time you go to sleep at night, you make a noise.
Yep.
That is kind of akin to when I take my hearing aids out or when my wife takes a bra off, and you lie in bed and go, oh.
Yep.
Because everything hurts. And then in 8 hours, you wake up and go, oh, that's nice.
Yeah, yep.
You do it again. And it just hurts a little bit more every day. That's what it is.
Yep. You get niggles.
It's what it is to be human.
Unexplained niggles.
It's what it is to be human.
It is.
Is to degrade over time. But we have this also expectation that, well, I get to know the answers to everything because I can pick up this thing, I can type into it, especially now with an LLM, and I go, geez, Osher, that's a really important question. You must be really struggling. And it's really sycophantic. Oh,
yeah.
Gosh.
Very few people ask such a question.
But you are real clever. Let me talk to you about some alternative therapies that you may not have tried. Where's the ethics in that? It's so tempting to be led down this path. But what would you say to people if of all the things that you've worked through and seen in the book? What are some things that we can do as a community? What are some things we can look for in policy and stuff like that can help this sort of thing to not happen? So stuff on the neighborhood level, on the friends and family level, and also some stuff on the policy level.
I think, I mean, obviously going through this process, I have thought about what could happen as a result of this. And I think, to be honest, it's two things. The first is actually a destigmatization of mental health, which has been a conversation that, you've been having for so long. But what I've noticed is a lot of, we hear that people who have had their experiences of pain and illness dismissed are often told, particularly women, that it's in your head. It's all in your head, right? And so I was watching an episode of Insight while writing this, and I found that within the people talking about chronic pain, they'd all had this experience of being told it was all in their heads. And initially, I was like, yeah, wow, that's how invalidating. But I started to feel a little frustrated after a while, and I couldn't work out why. And I think that's because as someone who has lived with mental illness for my whole life, I take medication for OCD, obsessive compulsive disorder. I think, well, why are we rolling our eyes at the suggestion that someone's pain might be in their head? Physical pain is in your head. That's where your pain receptors are. And then how can we say that being in chronic pain should not cause mental distress? It's because it's not just how the pain feels, but it's your nervous system becomes sensitized. So you just get more. Yeah. And then on top of that, if you're being dismissed and you're feeling alone, that's a storm. And yet even people that are vulnerable have internalized this idea that we've received from society that mental pain, mental anguish means it's not real, and you are not normal, you are not functioning, you are not rational. And so, yes, it's great that we have psychologists and, psychiatrists or mental health professionals, but they're very separate to doctors. In fact, I almost never can get a mental health care plan because I can't remember to go and get the referrals and the renewals and then wait and that kind of thing. So if we can actually do what a lot of these alternative medicine practitioners do, which is, say they can integrate or look holistically at the body, I think that would help. We need to be able to say, yes, I believe you. There's something going on for you that's causing you pain and I want to fix that. And part of that is we also need to address what's happening in your mind because, and this is what one of the doctors I speak to in the book, Dr. Geimer, told me, is that it's like pouring kerosene on the fire of your nervous system, mental health. So I think that's a really big part of it. And I think that the second thing that we need to do is we need medical professionals, doctors, people that are, in touch with regulatory bodies to be aware of what's happening. My auntie would go along with Lauren to doctor's appointments after doctor's appointments, the mainstream ones and the alternative ones. And she was becoming so frustrated that she would start asking Lauren's doctors, about what they were recommending her daughter and things like that. Now, doctors won't comment on the treatment of anyone that's not their patient. And I, of course, understand that. But my auntie was in a situation where she was kind of, every time she had to see a doctor for a checkup, she was taking Lauren's scans that had been sent over to Germany or whatever to be like, what is this?
Yeah,
this doctor is, pumping my daughter full of IV antibiotics and bleach. So what can I do? And they would say that they would often recoil because they would be so worried that the regulators would slap them for even engaging. They just go, no, I can't do anything there. So maybe a hotline?
So you're like perhaps a hotline that concerned family members can call about someone they care about and what maybe ping it to their Medicare number so the next time that they show up at a GP or something like that, there's a note to go, maybe you should ask her about the German antibiotic bleach guy.
I think when you look at, for example, the eating disorder numbers where you can call if you're worried about someone, or addiction numbers where you can call if you're a concerned friend or family member, I think it's really like that. At the moment, there's no, I guess what I would call the mainstream medical system is just not engaging with what's happening in the alternative medical world. And it would be great for people who have never encountered this, who have seen their loved one take something that in their minds going, that can't be good for you. Yeah. If they could go somewhere to find information that says, they're taking this, they're drinking this bleach because this is something recommended for parasites in the world, it might just allow a bit more of a dialogue and to stop us from going, okay, crazy, which would just drive them further down.
I think you're right in many ways. It does start with a conversation with your psych about how overwhelming stuff is. If you can't be with the overwhelmingness of what's happening, start with how you're thinking about it, maybe then looking for a guy from Germany that's going to, oh my God.
Yeah. I think there is something to be said for starting within your own country. What I would say is if somebody in your life, or if you're thinking of sending tests overseas, okay, that's okay, but get someone in Australia to review those tests and get someone else to have a look at them, because I think, there are a lot of these tests, that we would find that it'll tell you all these things that are in your blood, right? Like all of these chemicals or elements. They look like, oh my gosh, my blood's full of that. Turns out blood's supposed to be full of those things. Yeah. And they can be, wrapped up and given to you.
When I lived in Los Angeles, I've been hooked up to laptops and had someone go, oh my God, you're oh dear, this is, whoo.
Yeah.
I have electrodes all over me. They're like, well, you're lucky. You're real lucky, Osher, because,
Thank God you came here right now today.
Tonight, because there's a 10-week program that starts tomorrow that you can be a part of. And all you do is you come in here, there's a machine that's only here. It's not mainstream. And I was like, okay. Yeah. For someone who got brought up the way I brought up, I'm still curious.
I think it's
good
to be. But
eventually I'm like, you know what now?
Look, I think poop transplants are now legitimate. But who would have thought that someone had to have the idea, hang on a second, what if we just took your poo, put it in you? That's crazy to me as somebody with no medical background. However, these things do end up having evidentiary basis. So I think there's a cause to be open-minded, but I do think, you know, you have to take caution when you're doing that and stay connected to people.
Yeah.
And then also, I think we also think you shouldn't comment on people's health treatments. It's not our business. You know, it's not polite. I think it's okay if someone's in your orbit to be like, hey, that seems really extreme and it's okay, I don't know, but like, can I tell me more about that?
I'm way skinnier than you used to be and I don't know any of these people.
Yeah.
And like, since when do you wear linen all the time?
Yes, exactly.
Thank you for writing this book. I know it must have been difficult. It must have been real difficult, but I think you've done something really wonderful because you've painted the picture that we all kind of fear around our friend or someone we love. You've painted, you've shown, you open the batting with this is how it ends if you don't sort it out. And then it's very clever. It's a very good book.
Thank you.
Thank
you for reading it.
Of course.